Good afternoon. Welcome to PoliticIt podcast. We've got James Humphreys with us today. James, nice to have you.
Thanks. It's nice to be seen.
Yeah, it's nice. Well, and that's kind of an interesting way of putting it too, because you're normally behind the camera.
Yeah, in fact, I would imagine the majority of people that watch this won't know who I am unless they're sitting legislators or former legislators or in leadership or something, because that's where I've spent most of my time.
Yeah. So let's talk about you.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's talk about your background and what you've done. And I think people will find it interesting to find out all the things that you've been involved with.
Okay. Well, first, this will be a story for you. You've never heard of it.
Yeah.
It's how I got addicted to politics in the first place.
Okay.
I was a junior in college at the time at Weber State University.
At Weber State.
And I had just been elected as the Arts and Humanities Senator for Student Council.
Uh-huh.
And I was a member of a fraternity, and we were the smart ones on campus, which was kind of funny at the
So
time.
which fraternity?
This is why I say it's kind of funny, because I am an SAE, Sigma
Okay.
Alpha Epsilon. I'm an
Okay.
SAE. And the SAEs are known as being party people all over the country, but at Weber State, we ran student government.
Oh, interesting.
And we had the highest GPA of all the frats and sororities on campus.
Which isn't typical for
Which
that
is
frat.
not typical for that fraternity. No, definitely not. But it was a lot of fun, and I was having a great time, and I'd just been elected, and one of my goals was to not just be someone who planned parties. I thought that was a complete waste of everyone's time. And we didn't get a lot of money, but what we did get, we had to pay attention to. And of course, the student budget was quite large, because the number of fees that we collected for student fees was an enormous amount in the Student Senate. But I just thought that wasn't really good. And I was the Arts and Humanities Senator, and the Browning Center, you remember the old Browning Center at Weber State?
Yeah.
The fire marshal had been saying for years he was going to condemn it. He was going to close it. He was tired of it. And he finally had said, I'm done. When I was a sophomore, and I just got back from my mission, he said, I'm done. We're closing this at the end of the year unless you do something. And Governor Leavitt was a new governor at the time, and he got elected. He was elected as governor, but the legislature appropriated $3 million that first year to say, we want to study what we have to do. What are our options to fix this building so the fire marshal doesn't shut it down? And they had just come back with all of their recommendations, 4 choices, when I was elected as the student senator. And so, long story short there, Rod Julander, who was head of the poli-sci department at the time at Weber State, came to me and said, I know you don't want to plan parties. Would you be willing to volunteer to be an intern at the state legislature? And there wasn't a lot of interest at the time for that. In fact, so little interest that I ended up interning for 2 state senators.
Oh, interesting.
And we were in the sub-basement of the Capitol right before they started the nice remodel and built all the cool buildings, the Senate building and the House building. And so it was kind of like a pipe distribution network that we were in. It was hot and sweaty and nasty all the time. And there were all of us packed in there. But I interned for 2 state senators that year. And one of those state senators was the state senator in charge of had Weber State in the district, Senator Bob Montgomery.
Okay.
And the other state senator was Charles Stewart, who was from Provo. But it was an election year. And I got to run around and do all the things I needed to do. And one of the things that I did that first summer right after I was elected, at the end of the spring semester, we were getting ready to start in fall, was I didn't want the university to lose its space. So there was this cool student at the University of Utah in the architecture department who designed this magnificent new centerpiece for what would have been the College of Arts and Humanities. So I brought the model up, and I got a whole bunch of students, and we took yellow tape and we ran yellow tape all around the campus. It was really cool. There in the Browning Center, we marked off all the buildings, the elevator shafts, everything that was going to be impacted by what was needed to bring it up to fire and earthquake safety. And the reason we did that was because of the 4 options, one was fix fire safety only, one was fix fire and earthquake, one was fix the building for what it currently has, to replace what it currently has, and one was to give it a space to expand. And the amount of money was huge. It was like $7 million to fix it. It was like $10 million to do fire and earthquake. It was like $21 million to replace the space it was going to be lost, like $30 million to do the whole kit and caboodle. And what no one told the governor was that option A was never an option. because it was against the law to bring that building up to fire code without bringing it up to earthquake code as well. So that wasn't an option. It wasn't viable. But that was the option he wanted because, you know, like all good Republicans, we want the cheapest thing we can possibly spend money on, obviously. Yeah. But that wasn't an option. So I had these students mark all this off. And then I brought up members of the Capitol Facilities Committee and their spouses to tour the Browning Center every weekend. And Smith's and Albertsons were still around at the time, they donated food for breakfast or lunch or whenever they were coming up to do so. Utah Musical Theater was there, and they gave us free tickets. And I had all these legislators and administrative people from higher ed touring the facility and seeing the impact of what was going to happen for a college building, what it was going to do to our college. We would have been left with a beautiful theater with no educational purpose on campus if we did what the governor wanted us to do. And I invited the administration in to help me with this process, and they declined. They respectfully declined. I mean, what was some little 20-year-old student supposed to do? He was kind of worthless, and they ignored me. Well, I brought all these people in and showed them all these grand plans of what could be done and everything we were trying to handle. And so right before the session started, I got pulled into the president's office, and he yelled and screamed at me, which is how Mr. Julander heard about me and what my needs and wants were. And I said, look, I gave you a chance to do this. You didn't want to participate. That's not my fault. You think I'm just going to sit around planning parties? I'm not just any student. I care about what I'm doing, and I've been elected to protect this school. So that's what I'm going to do. Well, then I ended up as the Arts and Humanities Center. Now I'm an intern down at the legislature, and we're working behind the scenes, and Grant Protzman was going to run against Mr. Stephen, against brain freeze here, against the senator who was up for re-election.
Right.
So I had a Democrat and a Republican. Well, Grant was a vice provost for student services on the campus.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. So I went to the governor and I said, Governor, there's a problem here. I'd listened to him. He was really smart and he was really nice and he made time for any of us. He was so good to the interns. And I said, we got a real problem here. He said, what's the problem? I said, well, this is the option that works. We need to spend at least $21 million. However, Woodsill Hall and a loop around Utah Valley, what was UVCC at the time, community college, they need a loop. All these people need lots of money. And the way Capitol Facilities usually works is they give a few dollars to like everybody. Right. And it takes like 5 years to do a project and it ends up costing 25 to 50% more money, which is just stupid. And he said, what do you think we should do? And I said, well, you should fully fund one of those projects and tell the people you're going to line out and veto their stuff if they don't go along with funding these and saving money for the taxpayers, which is exactly what he threatened to do. And then they had to decide, well, was Utah State or Weber State going to get the money that year? We were lucky because then I went to the Senate president, who was Lane Beatty at the time, and I said, Grant Protzman is going to run against Bob Montgomery for the Senate, and they're both going to want to claim victory for protecting Weber State. Well, if we give them the money and we have Grant as the House sponsor and Bob as the Senate sponsor, we remove that caveat. So Grant can't use that as a cudgel against Bob during the election. And so I, in a small part, helped secure the $21 million needed for the Browning Center that we have today.
That's kind of cool.
And since I was like a 20-year-old, junior in college.
And that's where you got your kind of first...
Yeah, it was such a big victory. I was hooked.
Yeah.
I was addicted.
That's cool.
So that's how I got started in this whole thing.
Well, we're going to take a break.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and we'll come right back.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Tired of media bias? Frustrated by political noise? PoliticIt.com cuts through the clutter, giving you real facts, clear analysis, and unbiased insight on the issues that matter most. Stay informed, stay empowered. Whether it's elections, policy changes, or breaking news, we've got you covered. No spin, no agendas, just truth you can trust. Visit PoliticIt.com today because informed citizens shape the future. PoliticIt.com, where politics meets clarity.
This podcast was a push for me personally because I'm uncomfortable with the direction that our country is going in right now. And I believe that many people across the country feel this way. Even people who are diehard fans of the current president, Trumpers as they call themselves, those are part of the MAGA movement. They like a lot of the results they might be seeing, but they feel the country's off track. And even if they support the president right now, they're trying to get the country back on track. That's their motivation. Those on the far left think the country's off track and that it was always a little off track, but now it's way off track. But I think we all agree that there's a small sense of unease about where we're at as a nation and where we're going.
Welcome back to PoliticIt. So let's continue on. I want to know. Let's just briefly go over kind of, we went over your time at Weber State, but let's go a little bit into kind of details of jobs that you worked on and candidates that you worked with, maybe.
Well, I'll give you the good and the bad. There's a mix of all those things, and some people I won't name names on because it's probably safer if I don't. But after that whole experience at Weber State, I just started going back to the legislature every year during the legislative session, and I was a citizen lobbyist. I didn't work for anyone in that sense, but I loved campaigning. And so I worked on Levitt's reelection campaign, and then...
So was that connection made because of your...
Because of that setup, yes.
Yeah, and he thought, I need this guy working with me.
Yeah, and in fact, what he did was he brought me back the second year, which was the year that we had to secure funding for I-15 to replace I-15 with federal funding in order to prepare for the 2002 Olympics.
Oh, okay.
And so I worked on that project. And
you worked for the governor?
I worked for him at that point in time. And then after that, it was time for re-election, and I worked with the campaign.
Okay.
And
is that really where you got your start then with campaigning?
That's exactly where it was. And then I worked on a few local races, some city council races and mayoral races that were fun, just to help out here and there. There wasn't a lot to work with it, but I started working on the fun things. And one of my favorite things was working with Mia Love when she was running for Congress the first time. Because
so you were part of that campaign then?
Yeah. As time went on, what ended up happening was
that was a great campaign, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was a small cog. What I did was I did analysis work to teach people who didn't know about subject-specific material. She's a small-town mayor from Saratoga Springs. How does she know the ins and outs of how Social Security works? How can she answer questions when people have those things?
So were you developing those policy positions then?
Well, I was educating her on how the process works so she could develop the policies that she believed in.
Okay.
One of my personal philosophies has always been the more information you have, the better decisions people make. And so I worked with a number of people. I was president of the Utah Log Cabin Republicans for many years. I thought about running a few times, but I realized, direct full disclosure for everyone listening, I'm an openly gay man in Utah.
Yeah.
I can't get elected unless I live in the Avenues. Well, I'm clearly way too conservative to get elected in the Avenues.
Yeah.
So
that's the dilemma, right?
Yes. So I found early on that if I was...
So were you one of the ones that started the Log Cabin Republicans?
I wasn't, actually. It was struggling a bit. Mel Neimer, who's a dear friend of mine and is an accountant that I know in St. George now, he was here in Salt Lake, and he was president of LCR, and they went looking for people, and I thought it was interesting. And, the idea of being conservative and gay is kind of an oxymoron to most people in the gay community. And so he brought me on to help out, and I got really excited about things, and I started calling people and inviting people, allies as well as other members of the community, and saying, hey, we got to band together and really talk about this. This is a conservative state with a conservative legislature. You're not going to get in the room unless you have a conservative that'll talk to them. That's how it is. And so I became vice president of Log Cabin under Mel, and then when his term was up, I was elected president of LCR. And that led me to do things with UCCD, the Utah Council for Citizen Diplomacy at Westminster College, that I've done for years, and a few other things that I've done over the course of my time. But what I learned early on was the man behind the throne is a lot more influential than the man on the throne. There's a lot less scrutiny, and it isn't because things good or bad have to happen. It's just that you can be a lot more focused when you don't have so many different...
Right.
You're a state senator. There are so many people coming at you from so many different directions. Sometimes it's hard to parse through all that information, especially during the legislative session when it's hard to see the forest for the trees.
Well, so and I guess that makes sense for, the way you evolved into political campaigning and other things.
Yeah.
So one of the things I want to do, though, because
Yeah.
I want to get to this new project that you're working on.
Ah, yes.
Because I think it's fascinating. You're starting your own podcast,
Uh-huh.
and tell our audience a little bit about what you're trying to do.
Well, for years, just as a side project, I've at like universities and libraries and so forth, I've taught like basic constitutional understanding, how to read the documents our founders created so that people could interpret it for themselves and be able to justify what they do. But I realize as the discourse in this country gets worse and worse and worse, that partisan politics isn't anywhere near as successful as it used to be. Not from a financial point of view, just from an intellectual point of view. It's just politics is a young man's game, and I'm getting a little too old for that. So I thought, I want to take something from a more nonpartisan space, and I want to take the idea of real civic education, which, to be quite frank, is abysmal all throughout this entire country. Despite how much we try in Utah, ours is still pretty terrible.
Well, see,
too.
that was part of my justification for Senate Bill 334.
Yeah, one of the best bills I've ever seen. I hadn't known about it until recently when you brought it to my attention. I read through the whole thing. An entire set of curriculum based on real civics education for up to 30 credits. That's a phenomenal thing. I'm very excited about that. So I thought I'll start a podcast. I'll start doing some videos that we can do that are in a like Prager University style, et cetera, other things we can do to try and push out in a nonpartisan fashion the ability for people to have a little better discourse. I've always believed that things work best from the grassroots up. You know, our government's that way. The consent of the governed is what matters. And so we can't hold our elected officials accountable if they don't understand how to communicate with them. So that's what I'm doing.
in working on campaigns, didn't you find that it would be a lot nicer if our voters actually understood those principles?
Yes. And I have the right-wing conspiracy theorist in me says, have we deliberately dumbed down education in a way so that the public is too stupid to know? It's troublesome to me, extremely troublesome to me, that education in this country doesn't place anywhere near the amount of priority on people understanding how our government works.
You know, you think about it. That was Jefferson's really motivation for forming the University of Virginia.
Yeah.
Right. In order to make sure that people were educated and understood what these principles were, because they needed to know what they were trying to defend.
Well, George Washington said it really well as well. While he was president, most people don't realize that his time. We think about people like Madison, who wrote a lot of the Federalist Papers and helped with the Constitution itself, and Jefferson, who wrote the Declaration of Independence. But Washington was probably the most prolific American founding father ever. Like, the amount of stuff he wrote is shocking. And one of my favorite quotes from him is that in so much as the public is in charge of the government, the public must be enlightened.
Yeah.
So the fact that our education system doesn't prioritize making sure, I mean, how can the consent of the governed matter if they don't have any idea how the government works?
Right.
And it's fascinating. The way our government works is fascinating. It can withstand a massive amount of corruption and not collapse. In fact, one of the things I mentioned in one of the first podcasts that I've done is our government didn't collapse even during the Civil War, for heaven's sakes.
Right.
And yet you take a little country like Germany, has a standard parliamentary system. They get a little upset about the economy, and they have to have a snap election. Their country just collapsed. Your Justin Trudeau just resigned in Canada. Oh, we're going to have a snap election, and instead of waiting till the end of the 4-year term because the government fell apart in Canada. The Israeli government's fallen apart like 7 times in the last 8 years. The Italian government like 45 times in 46 years. I mean, it's shocking how much these grand democracies, I use that term loosely,
Right.
Are constantly having to reshuffle their governments. We've never had that problem. Our government has never collapsed under any form of adversity. That should tell everyone something about the miraculous way our system is put together.
Yeah. Well, and that education part of it, you know, is crucial. So what are you hoping to do with this?
Well, I'm hoping that when people go to Thanksgiving dinner this next year, or years from now, that when they sit down and they start arguing, which invariably always happens, especially with the internet and
Yeah,
not
people
being
say
quite
you
the
shouldn't
same.
talk about politics or religion, and I think we need to have more of those conversations.
Yeah, I think if we don't talk about it, then we don't learn how to talk about it, and then we become slaves to those who are in power as opposed to holding them accountable, in my opinion.
Great idea. So we're about out of time. So
Yes, sir.
let's talk about what's the name of this podcast?
It's called American Common Sense,
Okay.
with a question mark. Like, do we have any common sense left in our country? It's inspired by Thomas Paine's Common Sense, the pamphlet from 1776. Everyone should read that if they get a chance to do so. It's really cool. So
Absolutely.
yeah. So that's what I'm doing, is working on a project to try and help educate people so they can have a more civil dialogue and explain why.
So do you have a website?
Website is being developed right now. It's brand new. Like, we're 5 episodes in. Like, YouTube won't even let us put comments on yet.
Okay.
But by the time everyone sees this, I hope they do. There is a Facebook page and an Instagram page and a full YouTube channel.
Okay.
And you can also find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and anywhere you find your traditional podcasts. Again, it's called American Common Sense.
Question mark.
Spell it all with one word. Yep. And I think it's really, it could be a lot of fun, and I look forward to all the feedback that I can get and having a great discussion with the community, helping to raise the dialogue of civility in this country.
Well, great having you. James Humphreys.
Senator, thank you so much.
Nice.
I appreciate your time, sir.
We'll see you guys next week.